Um, Hello, everyone. I hope you can see and hear presentation. Topic of this presentation is management of complex projects. And the reason for that is, first of all, I spent 90% of my time in this field. So I did learn something about that, which I would like to share. The other reason is I am really passionate about projects. Projects are extremely engaging, rewarding, stressful, but they take much out of you and give you back wonderful memories and even better friends. So I certainly hope that this presentation is going to convey some of it, some of that drama, and that you will come out on a brighter side, not scared. I have structured this presentation into 3 pieces. Introduction is going to be centered on the elements, definitions, tools. We cannot cover all of it in such short period of time because there is a book called by PMI Institute with 700 pages that has, I would say, most of it. But we'll touch upon some basic elements. Next section is going to be concentrated on the complexities of the projects. And in this particular case, we will be talking about mega industrial projects. We'll talk about what a successful project looks like, what are the points of failure, and third section is focused on the solution. What do you do to overcome the or to prevent the failures and come out with successful projects at the end? So that's the basic outline. Project definitions, it depends who you ask. It always circles around this basic premise that it is a temporary endeavor. It's an action that is undertaken to create a product, a service, or result. And projects, all of them, they create the value. It may not look like that. Some are very, some clearly create the value. Some are done specifically for compliance reasons, like legal or social, environmental projects, for example. There are legal compliance projects, but they do create the value. Sometimes it's just a new technology that comes on the market and the company needs to integrate new technology into their processes. So yes, at the beginning that's expense, but in the long run, it creates the value. So project, you can call project a trip to a mountain or vacation can be a project because you have to schedule, you have to decide where do you want to go, you have to have money for that and all of that. But the project, industrial project, is something that is of far a bigger scale and requires a lot more planning and a lot more people to execute. There are different classifications when it comes to the projects. They can be classified based on the contract formation. They can be so-called lump sum projects where you agree with the contractor on a certain value of the work and you allocate that money to a contractor assuming the contractor will execute all the work within agreed scope. And you basically have very little control over it. The other one is time and material or cost plus, where contractor executes the work based on the man hours spent and the material used. So on a monthly basis, they bill you their cost. They include management fees and other expenses. But with these contracts, you have a little bit more control and arguably more risk, but that's for another presentation. Project size. Now these numbers, some of it are mine, like small projects up to $100 million. There are different numbers here, maybe 80, maybe 150, maybe 200, but just for the sake of the scale, let's call it $100 million. Medium and large projects are going up to $1 billion. Again, it's not a fixed number. There is, however, agreement that mega projects are 1 billion plus, and that's going to be a focus of our webinar today. Based on the implementation environment, projects can be greenfield, which is a brand new facility or a system that is being built on undisturbed land, or you don't have any existing infrastructure in a way that you have to tie into. Brownfields, on the other side, are the projects where you have to tie into existing facilities. It's called revamp, it's called extension, and they may be fairly complicated. The other classification is based on source of capital or finance. It can be publicly financed, it can be private money, or it can be mixed. Third one, or last one rather, is the based on a sector. Industrial projects or infrastructure. Industrial projects would include production facilities, oil and gas, food production factories, power generation factories, combined cycle, that kind of power generation. Infrastructure, it can be roads, bridges, real estate, buildings, business, it can be transformation of the business. You're not busy building anything physically, but you are transforming a business. Then IT, which is the extension of a network, upgrades to the software, and so on. And of course, it can be mixed, and I'm sure IT is a part of every and each of the one above. Three major elements of the project, of every project, are scope, budget, and schedule. And scope is simply a description of the desired output. It's description of the location. It's description of the stakeholders, inclusions in the scope, because they're going to be more than likely, actually, it's going to be always more than one stakeholder or more than two stakeholders. So division of the scope among different stakeholders is going to be defined in this area. Performance specification, it's going to have external description or external inputs. Budget is a cost of the project development, and we'll talk a little bit more about how do you arrive to a budget. And then schedule is the list of the planned activities with start and end dates, duration of each of the activity, and its sequence, interrelation between different activities. When it comes to the project development, each project has its own life cycle. The one included in this presentation is something that is, I'm going to say, typical for mining. And I find mining projects probably best defined just because of history. So it starts with the initiation by the owner. It goes into the concept study, which is high-level description of the project. It's when it comes to the, let's say, budget estimating, it's plus minus 50%. So it's very, very high level of description or definition of the project. After that, it goes into feasibility study, which would be fairly developed level of definition. Depends who you talk to. It's plus minus 15% or plus minus 20% definition, or our budget definition, which requires fairly a firm design. After that, it moves into front end work. Reason for that, it may or may not have this phase front end work. Sometimes, because of the circumstances and schedule, you have to advance certain parts of a project. For example, if there is no road to access the site, you have to first build the road. So that would be front end work. After that, it goes into detailed design, construction, commissioning, and handover to the operation, startup and handover to the operation. So that's a pretty standard life cycle. Decision to go or no go decision to proceed with the project, because lots of them end on the feasibility study, is done at that phase. And that's the point at which full funding is being allocated or raised, depending on the company. I already touched upon scope. In order to fully develop scope, you really have to do a certain level of design. You have to develop your process, decide which equipment you need to use, what infrastructure you need to have, buildings, and so on and so forth. You develop the layouts, spec out major equipment. So there is a high level of the definition in the design. I mean, in the pre-feasibility or feasibility stage, it's high level. When you move into detailed design, that's all way to the construction drawing, which means you have to define every aspect. A person who builds at the site has to be able to take that drawing and build. So design is important aspect of the scope. Based on that design, procurement of the equipment and material is executed. In the initial phase of the project, procurement is used just to arrive to the delivery dates and the cost of the major equipment. During the detailed design, procurement function is to actually go ahead, place the order, and ship the equipment to a site. Construction, its main role is the installation of the equipment and material based on the design and the support they get from the suppliers of the equipment. It's completely different team from the design and procurement team, special skill. And then there are different parts of the components of the scope, which is the permitting, soil investigation, community negotiations, and so on and so forth. Budget development or cost of the project development, again, depending which phase you are in. From the point of criticality, feasibility study is the most critical phase. That's where the budgets are baselined. There is certain, as I mentioned, certain level of design that needs to be done in order to cost major equipment, to cost management fees, to cost the operational expenses, predict. And all that information goes into the financial modeling. And based on that information plus cost of capital, depending how they finance the project, owner of the project provides or calculates the return. And there are different methodologies to do that, and decides whether or not that project is economic. Is it going to bring the value that they expect? Some projects, as I mentioned, have to go ahead because there are legal requirement. So regardless of the output of financial modeling, they still have to proceed with the project. Schedule is another important component. It's the one that is probably, from my perspective, most difficult to control, or most difficult to wrap your head around, I would say, not so much control, but to comprehend, because there are thousands and thousands of lines in a schedule. It has a different complexities. Early on, concept phase and feasibility phase, it's level 1 and 2, which is listing just major activities. And then when you go into detailed design, it goes to the level 4. Usually it's level 3, level 4, some areas. And the purpose of the schedule is to verify whether timelines are feasible, whether there is a critical path on a schedule caused by either equipment not being available. If you are planning something to install, if you want to start a project a year from now, but it takes 2 years to receive critical piece of equipment, then you're not going to have a good project. It's not going to happen. So at the stage, which is feasibility stage, you identify all these critical items that have long lead deliveries, and then you adjust the execution schedule based on that. So these are all restrictions that will play part in build-up of a schedule. Once that's established, scope, budget, and schedule, at the end of feasibility, they're baselined. And that's important, kind of stake in the ground, because from that point on, these numbers, these values, these agreements are going to be used to track project execution. There's a number of so-called KPIs, key performance indicators. Every company has its own. Every industry has its own, but something that is general to all is going to be project progress curve, and that's S-curve. Performance index is another good indicator how team is performing, whether earned value it meets actual cost, which means if somebody is doing task A, that task A has assigned certain budget. And if budget is $1,000 and the person spends $1,500, he's definitely underperforming. But if the person spends $800, that's overperforming. So measurement of performance is another, in my experience, is another difficult measurement, and actually it's a control of performance is very tricky piece if you're leading large teams. So you really have to stay on the top of the performance, and it's very important that KPI is tracked. On the industrial project, health and safety is the of the uttermost importance, simply because there are so many opportunities for injury and loss of life. So there is a bunch of the KPIs that are usually industry-wide. Some are specific for the company, but there are so leading and lagging indicators, and there are ways to actually track the performance related to health and safety and do preemptive measures and stop major incidents from happening. So in conclusion, KPIs are built on the agreed budget schedule and scope on the onset of the project, and present or represent major management tool for the project managers. As I mentioned, each project has stakeholders. It's primarily the owner. Owner may have a shareholders, it may be private company or maybe public company with shareholders. Community where the project is being built is very important. Some, depending on the project, for example, for mining projects, and depending on the location, impact of community is crucial because communities may stop the project. Government and regulators, these are related to the environmental permitting and the, I'm going to say cultural context, being archaeological sites, maybe disturbed or maybe uncovered that they're not being identified prior to project execution. So it's important that all this is covered through this section. Then you have the engineering construction company that's going to execute the actual work, and equipment and material suppliers. Equipment suppliers work through engineering and construction. Usually, sometimes owner procures the equipment and delivers to site. That's another way of doing it. When it comes to the overall project management, owner usually delegates that role to engineering and construction company because that's what their forte is. And then at the same time, on the owner side, there is a project manager. So, but it's in the observing mode rather than directing the work mode. Now, management team on the side of the engineering and construction company for the industrial projects, again, consists of project manager. Sometimes it's called project director. Actually, on the large projects, on mega projects, it is project director on the top of the pyramid with project managers for the area. Project manager usually it's assigned per area. That's where complications start. But for simplicity reasons, let's say there is one project manager. Project controls manager, that's the function of this section or area of work is crunching out the numbers. Basically, they take control of the schedule. They keep up with the schedule updates, produce schedule reports. They monitor the cost and produce all the reports. All KPI reports are coming out of the project controls department. Engineering manager is a person that is coordinating different engineering disciplines. On typical industrial project, you will have process engineer, chemical usually, or metallurgical in case of the mining, civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, control system, HVAC, so on. Procurement manager is, or function or procurement management team is to pre-qualify equipment suppliers, sort out the contracts or the purchase agreements, and monitor the procurement cycle from going out for bid, evaluation of the bids, bid assignment, follow up the fabrication, inspection at site, logistics, shipping from the site, from the fabrication site to the installation site, and that's where the handover to construction happens. Procurement team also takes care usually of contract formation. That will be for installation. If you need somebody to not if you need somebody to install all the equipment, to do all the earthworks, and this will be all different contracts. Usually the contract formation comes from the procurement department. Then you have contract administration. Time is too short to go into that. Construction manager, the main role, it's really handover at some point of time. Handover from project manager to construction manager happens. Although from the kind of hierarchical point of view, construction manager reports to project manager. At some point in time, toward the end of, let's say, 2/3 through the construction, once all the engineering procurement is wrapped up and major activity becomes construction, then construction manager basically takes the lead on the project. Health and safety manager, they're usually involved right from the get-go. Design is usually, it has to be built into, health and safety has to be built in design to large extent, if possible. If not, then you have to put procedures to be followed at site and during the operations. So monitoring of the key performance indicator at site and preventing the injuries and the accidents is a major headache on every project. Quality manager, there are standards how this is done. Usually deals with the fabrication. Focus of quality management is ensuring that the equipment that is being delivered and material to site meets the spec. And then document control that makes sure that everything is tied and filed and retrievable. So these are just some of the major functions, major team members. Procedures and tools, that's another set of the environment for every project. There are standards. Each company has its own. They tend to be extensive on the engineering and construction side. Owners, some do have them, some don't. So they rely on the contractors to prepare all this documentation and pull best practices from their database. I'm not going to spend any time on this except on the execution plan, which is a main document that is tying everything together. So execution plan describes all the major step procedures, where to find the information, how to number documents, and so on and so forth. So that's a very important document written right at the beginning, at the inception, just after kickoff. Now, complex projects or mega projects, as I mentioned, anything about $1 billion is considered a mega project. There are many. I'm listing few here. These are built. There are quite few in construction. Three Gorges Dam is enormous project, has been in construction for 17 years, finished. And the largest power production facility. Qatar based tunnel that's been finished a couple of years back, $10 billion, 20 years to build. The last two, Jamnagar Export Refinery and Gemini Offshore Wind Farm, are two projects that I've been on. The upper image is the Jamnagar. Jamnagar Export Refinery is add-on to the existing refinery. So there was refinery that was producing gasoline for Indian market. And then that refinery is basically doubled up in capacity. So I was on that second phase. Just for the sake of I'm still impressed by this information. It says second refinery work site covered an area larger than London. So that gives you sense of how large these projects can be, not only from the point of the money, but complexities, size, metric tons of concrete, meters of pipe, tons of steel installed, and so on and so forth. And then Gemini Offshore Wind Farm, at the time when it was built, it was by one measure the largest offshore wind farm in the world, $4 billion, 600 megawatt installed power, 100 kilometers north of shore in Netherlands. Gemini refinery, as I mentioned, is in India. Here's a little bit more information. I took this, I was working for Bechtel at the time. Bechtel is one of the largest privately owned construction companies in the world, has been around for about, I believe, 120, 130 years, 130 years, I believe. The main office was in London. There were, if you, on second paragraph is stating that there were 2,800 engineers in 19 offices around the world. So we had basically 24 hours design work going on. Construction was done by the client. It was just too risky because, as you can see, one of the photos in the middle is showing manual labor. That's not standard here, I would say, in the Western world, but in India is a norm. They even have these safety helmets adjusted so they can carry load on the helmet. 70,000 workers. I mean, that's like a whole city at the peak. So that's quite, in my mind, in my experience, definitely the most complex project I've been on. So what makes complex projects complex? It's a size, it's a number of pieces, it's the interfaces, it's the interaction of the interfaces, it's the fact that everything is happening at the same time and you have to catch things as they go. And if there is a change on one side in one element, you have to make sure that change is propagated. So that's that complexity. Whereas, which you don't have on a smaller project, where every change is visible to here, changes, what happens can be lost easily. So complexity of the project significantly increases the risks. The other component of the complex project might be on the mining side, our remote site access or no access to a site whatsoever. I was on a project on study that was, it's not built yet just because there's no access. There are 300 kilometers of the road required just to access the site. And that road itself is $1 billion. So yeah, that's hard. It's hard to come up with that money for a single industrial facility. Power supply is another problem on some sites. Most of these remote sites are diesel engine, accommodation, so on and so forth. Size of a team that you need to execute large projects multiplies, as you could see from the example of the Jamnagar projects. There were teams on 3 continents, 19 offices. So you have to have procedures that will coordinate teams where the information will flow when it needs to flow. So these are just some of the complexities or some of the elements of the complex projects. Now, how do you even succeed on such complex project, and what is success? And Short definition, the absolutely shortest definition is ahead of time, under the budget. You'll hear that often. In reality, is no loss of life, ahead of time, under the budget, on spec. And in reality is no loss of life, no permanent injuries when it comes to health and safety, no material damage, and no environmental damage. If you can cover these few points, then you are already way ahead of yourself. The other important aspect is the quality. The facility has to meet performance specification. If it doesn't matter that you were on the budget and on this or under budget and on the schedule. If it doesn't perform as it is meant to be, that means you just missed the whole purpose of the project. So that's extremely important. Just to give you a little story, on one of the projects, we were already in the installation phase. I'll try to limit number of information I'm sharing because I don't want the project to be identified. I didn't mention it anyway. And some of major connections between major structural elements started to fail. So it turned out it was systematic failure. And we were like 30-40% through the construction, and new pieces of equipment were coming on that were relying on the foundations that were basically failing. So finding solution within 2 or 3 months and making corrections, that was probably the most stressful 2 months in my life. But such kind of failure is possible. It was traced back to design, and nobody caught it, not in design reviews, not in during the fabrication, not even during the pre-construction reviews. We went all the way to installation, only to find out that the foundations didn't meet the spec. So that's the kind of scary moment that you can run into. Budget. Budgets are always point of contention for a couple of reasons. There's something called contingencies, which are not built in the base budget, and clients tend to believe that contingencies are not to be spent. Owner tends to believe that contingencies are not to be spent. Contractors believe that contingencies are to be spent. So it's a tough call there. So there are different reasons why budgets can be overrun. We'll get into it, but that's another major component of the success. Schedules, yet another one. Meeting the end date in particular is important. You can miss intermediate date, you can miss certain dates, but there are the milestone dates that you don't want to miss. So you're always fighting to meet the milestone dates. Team has to be well functioning, otherwise a project is not going to happen. The rule is work hard and play even harder, have fun. And then external stakeholders, you have to have relation with these. You cannot have conflict with these, with the people. They're part of the project. They have a right to ask the question. They have a right to ask for their demands to be met. So you have to have good relation there. I already talked about some of the things that can go wrong. Scope changes, scope creeps are usual. You can come across existing structures that you didn't know about, that need to be demolished, that change design. Soil may not be of the condition that was assumed. or measured, maybe pocket of soil that doesn't meet, deviates from measurement. Or simply people don't include everything. They just forget that they need water at certain locations. So all of a sudden there is a new pipeline that needs to go to a new location, stuff like that. Cost overruns, I already spoke a little bit about that. Performance is the team performance is usually the key. That's why you have to have good team. Incorrect definition and budget assumptions when you're building the budget. You really have to spend time proving the budget, where everything is included and whether sufficient contingencies are left in the budget to cover for unknowns. Equipment and material conditions, market conditions can have huge impact on the cost overruns. I was on a project where a small valve, tiny little valve that is isolating 3/4-inch pipeline was costing $10,000, and you couldn't just buy 10 valves to sit around. You had to account for every valve, and the delivery for these valves were 9 months. So as the market condition changed, delivery went, both price and delivery went up. So that's another good memory from one of the projects. Schedule delays, as I mentioned, the equipment suppliers might have problems. Schedule may not be set from the get-go. Team that builds the schedule, because it's a teamwork, they have to buy into a schedule. If they don't buy into a schedule, you're not going to have good schedule. So everybody has to sign off on the schedule, agree that it can be done within certain time frame. Okay, so I already talked about health and safety and poor quality. For example, poor quality, just painting of, let's say, foundation for the offshore wind farm. There are a couple of layers, 2 or 3 layers of a paint, and each layer has to be of a certain thickness, and the preparation for a paintwork is critical. So if you don't have that, people will be out there painting over and over foundations for next 20 years because of poor quality. Team, you have to have good team. You have to have a couple of key people within the team. It has to have experience, knowledge, and it has to be engaged team. Otherwise, this engaged team is not going to be performing. So how do you overcome all this? First of all, on a mega project, you have to have clear procedures. You cannot have halfway or even 1 month into or 2 months into a project saying, oh, how do we do this? Where do we go? All these procedures have to be written, issued, approved, clarified right from the get-go. So people know what they're doing, where to get document numbers, who signs off, who reviews, and so on and so forth. Baseline schedule, as I said, ask for commitment. Have people actually sign on the schedule. I used to have people sign on the schedule and say, yeah, we can do it. Similar for the cost, have them sign, have them commit, have them review, and still leave some management reserves because you'll need them. Organizational structure. Now, org chart is such important document. It has to be clear who reports to who does what. You would think that's an easy and automatic thing. No. I've seen projects fail just because the org chart was not set properly. And it's something that has to be done right at the beginning. And revisit often, move people around. If they cannot perform at the level, move them around. Keep records and files. You will need a log of all decisions. Keep everything written and filed so you can retrieve it. Manage time. Learn how to run meetings effectively. make them brief, no long discussions, follow up. Problem solving is not in the meeting, that comes after the meeting. And do not micromanage team. Leave space for their individual creativity. Get out of the way, but check the status. If somebody is not delivering, help along. If help doesn't do it, if help doesn't bring them to the level, then that person will have to leave the project. So don't be afraid of asking person to leave the project or asking their boss to be replaced. That's another lesson I've learned, kind of hard way. In this section, this couple of, I believe, 2 slides I have, I call it secret sauce. It's just the way my brain works and what worked for me. When you manage complex project, I actually have a picture of project in my brain. It's like, it looks a little bit like that illustration on the side. I see all the pieces and they're actually moving in my head. And I go, oh, okay, so this piece just moved. What else is going to be impacted because this piece moved? Or this piece was supposed to move. It was supposed to progress, but didn't. So what else is not going to progress? So have that big picture. So zoom out, see the big picture, and then zoom in on a detail. And don't try to solve the detail, but just bring it to the surface and leave it to a responsible person to solve it. But get it resolved and get it resolved in a timely manner. So in relation to that is anticipate the problems. Don't wait for something to happen. Look for the trends. It's usually something is late by a day, then it's late by a week. Then before you know it, it's late by 2 weeks and month is gone, and you cannot recover that. So you can tolerate maybe delay by a day or 2 days, but when it comes to day 3, you cannot tolerate that any longer. So that means look for trends. This is the time when you step in and say, okay, what kind of help you need? We need to resolve this. So anticipate the problem. Don't trust or say, oh yeah, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. No. Tomorrow is fine as long as it's not 3 days down the road, month down the road, and so on and so forth. So again, never assume in relation to them, check. Trust your team, but check. See whether they're actually delivering what they said they will, and close that information loop. Observe. That's linked actually to looking at the big picture. Be or put yourself in that observation mode. Look at all elements, look how things move, look how people react, and then identify the problem, talk to people, get their opinion, get the facts, and then make that corrective action, whatever it might be. Don't react right away. Give yourself time to observe and come to conclusion. Always try to get ahead of the curve because you'll need time. And it's easy at the beginning to get ahead of the curve. Set the procedures up, set everybody straight so people know what they're doing, what to expect, how to go about information, where to look for information, so on and so forth. Because during the progress, these numbers I'm listing here are my numbers. This is why I came to, these are my conclusions. As the time progresses, the projects are going to have different difficulties depending on the progress stage. So at the beginning, it's relatively easy to achieve the progress. And then going to, let's say, 40% is a breeze. But then from 40 to 60, it starts to slow down. In my experience, when you hit 70% project, that's when you go, oh, did we do everything right? Maybe my project is not going to go as envisioned. Maybe we made major mistakes. That's how I know we are at 70%, because that's where all the information start coming in. You start integrating information. You find one error and then you start doubting everything. And then you have to check. So projects are, in my mind, actually almost like living thing. They breed at a certain different scale as they go along, as they grow. And then toward the end, you kind of hit 95% and you never finish because you have to move to site. That last 5%, finishing in the office is impossible. And so these are my experiences. I haven't seen these numbers anywhere else published. The last 2 points I'm going to leave you with are the projects are not about you. It's about project itself. It's about being successful. It's about completing everything as a team. So projects have goals, values, principles. We are all serving projects. We all have a role. Everybody has a job to do. One is no better than the others. It's just different. So just don't make it about yourself. Over the period of time, I actually came up with the alternative org structure, which I called OMOD. I've executed my projects with this structure. It wasn't about me. It doesn't matter what role I have. It was always about the project. So there is a little bit more information at the o-mod.com. If you're interested, you can read about that. Team, you cannot do a project alone. You have to have team. And in my experience, I always had 2 or 3 people that I can heavily rely on, and then everybody else. So you have to have people who are your allies. As a project manager, you have to be even-handed, fair. You have to set boundaries, expectations, but you have to be kind, because kindness is not weakness. It's the strength. It used to be interpreted as a weakness, but people are turning around, and the all leadership with advancement of leadership skills, that's being recognized. So in my experience, it was always the case, and it was always success. So be firm and polite, be fair, use humor to break down barriers. Bosnians have huge advantage because, hey, we are born that way. So that's pretty much it. I thank you for hanging around. The sentence I've included here is basically summing up what I shared as a secret sauce. Leading a large team to success on a complex project or in the operations seems impossible, but it happens. It happens when masculine traits of decisiveness and action are mixed with feminine traits of intuition and support. So this is my sentence. This is my conclusion. And lots of leadership skills, when you break them down, they can be boiled to this sentence. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Nermina. I personally have about 2 questions, but I'm going to start with the one from the audience first. The question is, what is your opinion on starting a project management career early on? If it is possible and a wise decision, what kind of projects would you recommend for starting? What books would you recommend?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are pros and cons. My experience is you will be better project manager if you stay in the whatever technical field you want to be in. If you are, let's say, IT person, learn your trade. It's important that you know technical part. I worked with the project managers who said, oh yeah, that's for the specialists. That's too much of a detail. I'm of different opinion. I think you don't have to know everything. Like my degree is in automation. I know nothing about civil. Over the period of time I learned, I was curious enough, but you just have to know enough to ask the questions. You cannot be, the worst thing is if you end up, you're fast tracking your career, you end up at certain position and you're totally lost. So that's not where you want to be. So spend some time, learn the skill. Learn the skill so that you have a ground or core expertise. As I said, you cannot ever learn everything, but have core technical expertise. And then go into the project management. My career, and I think I'm quite pleased with that, my career went from the design engineer. I went into group supervisor, which means I oversaw automation group. That's where I really learned how to manage, because I was managing 5-6 people at a time. But whatever processes I was using there were identical process to project management. It was just applicable to smaller group of people, right? And of course, there is financial part. So I'm giving you a long answer just because I want you to hear reasons why. Now, when it comes to the studying, there is PMI Institute, this Project Management Institute, international organization that has standard courses, or through them you can find standard courses. There's lots of material on the web. Just Google project management, and lots of things are going to come up. So PM book by PMI Institute is probably, it's expensive book. I don't know whether it's worth buying, because the internet has so much information. So start there. And if you really want if you want more information, please feel free to reach out and I'll share more with you.
Thank you. We have another question that actually is something I've been interested in as well. How to deal with different stakeholders that have conflicting requirements. And I would like to add my own question to this: how to deal with stakeholders in general when they might not fully understand the issues the team might be dealing with.
Okay, so one thing I didn't mention here is the process of escalation. What works well, it depends where you are, which role you're in. If you're a project manager and you're dealing, let's say, with the project manager. If you're a project manager for a construction company, you're dealing with the project manager on the owner's side. That's usually where the conflicts arise. There is a certain level. First of all, you have to have patience. You have to address legitimate concerns. So, because it is in the interest, this is where your leaderships come in play. It's in the interest of everybody to have successful project. So if you are asked for certain unreasonable request, you have to be able to explain why the request is unreasonable and offer another solution. If for any reason that doesn't help and you continue to have conflicting relation with the other person, you escalate that to the level of a sponsor. Sponsors are people who are not involved with the project on day-to-day basis. They're coming from, let's say, engineering or construction company. There are high-level executives on both sides. And because they are not involved on day-to-day basis, they have this independent, they're kind of judges that have this independent review, and they basically resolve the issue. So in my experience, it rarely went there, but the escalation is important. It's important that there is escalation mechanism, that you have that venue. Okay. Are the requirements unreasonable? You have to be able to explain why they are unreasonable, or give them something else. If they are asking for, I don't know, something to be done by tomorrow, I said, well, it cannot be done. Or you can say, I can do this tomorrow. Give them something that can be done by tomorrow, if that is the request. So don't say no. I say, okay, I cannot finish everything by tomorrow, but I can finish this. Would that be enough? And then in 2 days, I'll finish this. In 2 days, you're going to have much better quality of the product, because what I'm giving you tomorrow is not going to be what you really expect. So usually at that stage, people back off because they understand it's not that you don't want to do, it's really because you cannot do it. I don't know whether I answered the question, but never say no. Try to meet people halfway. Be genuine about that. Build a trust. Once you build trust, that's gonna take away. And that's why I said don't react right away. Take your time, observe, be calm. Give them reason. Once you once I reasoned with my son when he was 5, I was able to convince him. Actually, he taught me how to reason with with people who ask too much or who have unreasonable requests. So, yeah, you have to be able to explain why you cannot do something.
That makes sense. We have 2 more questions. One of them is there a software application that covers the management of complex projects from the beginning to the end?
No. You'll find probably at the end everybody's using Excel spreadsheet. That's shame. But there are systems, there are programs that are on the market. But some will be used for the budget buildup. Some will be used for control, document controls. There are components. I've never worked on the project that has integrated software. There are components, and I know of some that have, I've never used it. I know of some software program that is, but frankly, every company, every project is going to have its own set of tools. So yeah, that's my experience.
And the next one is, what was your biggest challenge during your career of managing projects, and how did you solve it?
There were a couple of. This is not in the order, but one comes to my mind as, first of all, I'm using my intuition, gut feeling a lot. That's the first indication that something goes wrong on the project. If you have that small nagging thought in your head saying, check this, something doesn't feel right, you cannot put your finger on, you don't have proof that it doesn't go right, listen to that, check it, do follow up. It was the case where I had to actually remove somebody from project, and I waited for too long. I waited probably for a month too long, and so that was the one of the most difficult decisions to make. I had, of course, there are lots of challenges being of technical nature, which I talked about. Going into a brand new field, I worked in the mining industry, then I worked in the oil and gas, chemical, power, renewables. So every time I had to learn new technologies, that was quite challenging. The learning curve was steep, but at the same time, knowledge that I brought from chemical into, say, renewable, nobody else had that knowledge. So that was actually an advantage. So what looks on one hand as handicap, which is you don't have 30 years of experience in one field, is actually advantage in the other hand. Dealing with people, again, I always look at the problem as opportunity to learn something. So all this that I'm sharing with you, I look at actually as a huge opportunity in my life to gain new skill. There was a case where I had quite aggressive member of team who was adamant that one other person need to be fired because he doesn't know anything about anything. He's a young guy. And that person was close to retirement. So I had to remind him that 30 years ago, he knew nothing about his field, and his energy would be better wasted if he was mentor to that young fellow than if he complains. And he agreed and became mentor to that person, and problem was solved. So you kind of have to learn how to direct the energy of a person, because people have genuine intent to do well. They just don't know how to direct their energy or how to express their energy. So you can help them along and to formulate or redirect their energy. So again, these were all challenges that actually forced me to learn how to do stuff.
And we have a question: how do you dig for information that would help with risk mitigation?
Some comes from the experience, your personal experience. Most of it comes from the team review. I find team reviews, design reviews, constructability reviews, process reviews, just think of any review with the team as the best way to identify risks and problems. You'll be surprised how many times I was involved in the, let's say, P&ID review, and we did it like 3, 4, 5 times, and we always find a fatal flaw. So the point is that, like, should we have another one? I'm just joking here, but reviews, talk to people, engage people, and talk to your colleagues. Find somebody who will mentor you. At the onset of a career, if you have a mentor, that's a huge advantage. But that's just one venue. The other venue would be engage the team, because the group think is going to be very helpful.
And a personal question of mine, when a project is going off track, is the team communication the way you get it back on track?
Okay. First of all, it depends how far off track you are. If you can be off track where it cannot be resolved or fixed for the given budget and the schedule. Hopefully that's why I was mentioning trends and anticipation. Hopefully you can intervene before it's too late, before it's beyond repair. So I'll talk about 2 scenarios. You really have to, through your experience, develop the feeling when what is that point of inflection, when things will go beyond repair, and intervene before that point comes. You have to have a team. This is where I was saying, have a couple of people you can heavily lean on. These are the times where you heavily lean on a couple of people that will help you bring project back. If it goes beyond inflection point, then you go to your boss and ask for help outside of the organization. I mean, outside of the project org chart. Somebody within your own organization should be involved and help you out. But hopefully you'll recognize that point of inflection that's so important.
Thank you so much. From the comments, I can tell that the people that watched the webinar are really impressed by it. It was really full of information and knowledge. So thank you for giving us a bit of your time and sharing the knowledge.
Anytime. As I said, reach out. I'll be happy to follow up if you need additional information. And we'll see how it goes, even a mentorship.
I will forward the contact. Have a great evening.